Hi everyone, my name is Husnara Begum. I'm the Associate Editor at CheekyLittleCareers.com. I'm here with Cheeky Little Careers Associate Careers Consultant Jane Drew, and we're going to be talking about qualifying work experience. Before Jane says a couple of words about herself, let me put qualifying work experience into a bit of context for you. You may have all heard about the Solicitors Qualifying Exam, which will eventually abolish the legal practice course and training contract system as we know it. The qualifying work experience is as the name suggests, the work experience part of that route to qualifying under the new regime. Jane is going to explain more in a bit more detail, but Jane, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Isara. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, I'm Jane. I am a freelance graduate recruiter and careers consultant, and I've been self-employed and a freelancer for the past nearly 6 years. Prior to that, I was head of graduate recruitment training development at one of the big city law firms for many, many years, and prior to that at PricewaterhouseCoopers, again, within graduate recruitment and HR.
So without overcomplicating it, because I know when it comes to the SQE or QWE, it can get very complicated and, to be honest, a bit dry. But this is really essential viewing, by the way, because the SQE is here. And if you are interested, by the way, in more SQE related stuff, then there's a separate video I've recorded with Paul Gascoigne, who is the recruitment manager at Sherman and Sterling, and that's all things SQE related. But Jane, in a nutshell, what is qualifying work experience? If you can explain it in the simplest possible way, please.
Absolutely, thanks. So, in a nutshell, it's the work experience part of qualifying as a solicitor. And going forward, it's now much more flexible. The old system, you would have completed, if you're a non-lawyer, the conversion course to law, everyone had to complete the legal practice course, and then you would have your 2 years fixed training contract in one organisation. So going forward, is the work experience part, as I say, of qualifying as a solicitor. Has to be a minimum of 2 years still, but the big difference is that you can build that experience up in up to 4 different organisations. So it could be in one solid block within one organisation and one role, or you could build that up to say 4 different organisations. So fantastic if perhaps you're working as a paralegal and you've got a sort of contract, and then you're going to move on to another paralegaling role, so you can build your experience up that way. And we'll come on to talk about competencies as well, because it has to tie in. It can't just be any work experience. It has to tie in with the Solicitors Regulation Authority competencies.
Okay, so you mentioned that it can paralegaling can count as qualifying work experience. What else counts?
So other than paralegaling, so the main ones are, so on placement, perhaps whilst you're doing a sandwich degree, working in a law clinic, at a voluntary or charitable organisation, so it's a paid or non-paid experience, so such as like Citizens Advice or a law centre. I've already mentioned paralegaling, or actually on a training contract itself, because actually going forward, reality is there will still be a number of firms that will take students still through the traditional kind of, may not be called training contract, but there'll still be 2 years within one organisation and still move around seats. So those are the main ways. I think that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways in which you can qualify.
Okay. So does that mean if I'm currently an SQE prep student, I can still apply for training contracts? Or do I need to do qualifying work experience as a paralegal?
You can, it's very flexible, so you could do either. But yes, if you are an SQE prep student, you can still apply for training contracts. I think the key here, what we're saying to people, and Husnara and I, we've discussed this, it's really important that you check first before, completing application forms, which can be really time consuming and lengthy. It's worth checking with the graduate recruitment teams of the firms that you're interested in applying to make sure that they will be happy to accept your applications. Because, having spoken to a number of different firms, this is obviously all very new, but some firms going forward may still develop their own essentially SQE prep courses for 1 and 2, and still want to recruit their own trainees through that way. But it's still 2 years in advance for many firms, but there is much more flexibility.
That echoes what I've heard, which is that some firms who I would say are probably more conservative in their approach to recruitment will still favour penultimate year students, whereas others have said to me that they are very open about accepting applications from SQE students. So,
Yeah,
as you said, it's really important to pick up the phone or to send an email to the
yeah,
relevant teams, graduate recruitment teams at the target firms that you've identified.
yeah, yeah,
There are, of
absolutely.
course, also timing issues, aren't there? Because if you think about it, if you're an SQE prep student now, most firms are now taking applications for training contracts not starting until 2023.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's something else to bear in mind. That's still going to be the case for many, many firms. Is 2 years in advance recruitment pattern. So again, goes back to what we said earlier. But make sure you're checking with the firms before you're spending lots and lots of time completing the application forms. Check with them first. Are they happy to accept your application? When is their next available date? There may be some firms that will have earlier start dates, but definitely worth checking beforehand in case it's going to be not a possibility for you to apply at this particular point.
And what about we've talked about what qualifies as work experience. So you've talked about paralegaling, volunteering, training contracts,
Law clinics, etc.
law
Yeah.
clinics, etc. What about experience gained overseas?
So in theory, yes, that could count. I think the important things to note are you have to the work experience that you undertake, whether it's here or overseas, it has to fit with the SRA's list of competencies. They can obviously be found in much more detail on the firm's website. So any work experience, any qualifying work experience that you're undertaking must satisfy those competencies. So if you're working overseas, you have to bear that in mind, that has to still satisfy the competencies. And the other important thing to remember is that your work has to be signed off by a qualified solicitor of England and Wales, or the COLP, the
Compliance officer.
Compliance officer. Thank you, Snara. Or the compliance officer if your organisation has one. So yeah, that's important to note, that if you are overseas, it may be, it's not impossible. In theory, you can do that, but it might be more tricky.
Yeah, it's interesting you've said signed off. I think there is still, the jury's out, I think, as to whether it's signed off or confirm or.
Yes, yeah, actually, I should have said more, because actually that's an important distinction. Again, very different from the training contract system previously. And I think it's important to note for you, if you're a student and there may be an element of having to actually educate your employer in terms of what this actually means. But in terms of signing off your qualifying work experience, essentially what you're asking the solicitor to do is to basically state that you've actually completed that qualifying work experience on those dates. These were the tasks you undertook. These were your key responsibilities and what you learned. So they're signing off that you've actually completed that work. They're not signing off to say whether or not you are competent. That is something that the SRA will do by you undertaking the SQE1 and SQE2 exams. They are going to also test your competence. So that's an important distinction. They're essentially signing off to say you've done the work, not whether or not you're competent.
And I think that should also make it a lot easier for the employer, because they're no longer having to say, yes, this person has reached a required level of knowledge,
Level of standard,
experience,
yeah.
to deem them suitable for practicing as a fully fledged solicitor.
Yeah.
Which I think that ultimately will make the process even more flexible, because employers, I've been told by various experts, would have to have pretty compelling reasons not to
sign off or
to confirm.
To confirm, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and I guess the one thing that worries me personally about qualifying work experience is there are bound to be students out there who are thinking, right, I'm going to do the SQV prep because it means that I can qualify a little bit earlier because I can bank my experience retrospectively, or I will just go and get any old paralegaling job just so that I can get the admission. I get very nervous when I hear stories like that. Am I right that it's got to be centered around what sort of solicitor you want to become?
Absolutely. And I think this is really, really key. And and I think it's thinking, what's your end goal? You know, ultimately, you're doing all of this because you want to become a qualified solicitor. And it's a bit like with the old training contract system, you've got to think about, as Husnara just said, what type of solicitor do you want to become? Do you want to be in private practice? Do you want to be in-house? Do you want to be in a kind of not-for-profit? And what areas of law are you keen to qualify into? And whatever that is, you need to ensure part of your qualifying work experience is gained in those particular areas, because there are two elements to this qualifying work experience. One is to get the 2 years, so that with that and the exams and the suitability, you can then be signed off by the SRA as a qualified solicitor. The second element is that you're marketable and that your CV is going to be attractive to future employers, and that you're going to have the relevant experience to apply for an NQ role. So it's really important, I think, and I think there's a tendency, Husnara, I think you'd agree that when you read all the notes there are at the moment about qualifying work experience, this is not mentioned enough. That you really need to think about, the kind of quality. It's not just quantity; it's the kind of quality of that experience, and how relevant it is to what you want to do later on.
Okay, and one final question. It sounds to me from talking to quite a few prep students that a lot are going to try to gain the experience through paralegaling. What advice do you have for people who are looking for paralegaling work to count as qualifying work experience? Because it's that classic, I can't get qualifying work experience because I've not done the LPC. Because I know that if you look at a lot of paralegal vacancies, often the minimum requirement is you've got to do the LPC first. Any tips for those students?
I think I would say, so firstly, in terms of where to look, it's to sign up with recruitment agencies. Many of the larger ones will have a separate kind of paralegaling desk.
Sure.
So to sign up with those. And also think about kind of, I suppose, baby steps. If you don't have any experience already, it's starting off small in a more junior role potentially. So it might be a much more, because even, when we're talking about paralegaling, that can entail something from a very basic kind of document review type job to much more experienced, higher level of responsibility, more akin to the kind of work you might be doing as a trainee solicitor or beyond. So I think it's important to sort of think, okay, let's think about what in reality, what type of work can I get with my current experience already? As I said, maybe baby steps, so you take on a more kind of basic admin role as a stepping stone to take you on something with a higher level of responsibility, but in an area that you want to go into.
I agree 100% about baby steps and potentially getting bridging jobs. I know of students who have worked in the business services teams of law firms where the LPC isn't a requirement, but it gives you exposure and a foot in to a law firm, which you can capitalise on. So I think that particularly in this jobs market where vacancies are a little bit more scarce and there are more candidates going for the roles, it's certainly helpful to think outside the box and go for things that perhaps aren't on the face of it law related, but it's a bit of a sideward manoeuvre.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as you're saying, so if you're wanting to ultimately move into a kind of corporate commercial role, even maybe it's too much of a leap to move into a sort of paralegaling corporate role. So as Husnara said, whether it's a BD role or a kind of admin-based role within a corporate organisation or in-house, that you can then build on those transferable skills and that experience to help you move into, as you say, sort of a bridging job to help you move into a more relevant paralegaling role.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Jane. That's really useful.
You're welcome.
I will chat to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.